This lesson is over major scales. Scales are collections of notes. There are different kinds, major, minor, and other scales too, but in this class we'll just be learning major and minor scales. And first we're going to learn major scales. In order to make a major scale, you're going to have one note representing each letter of the alphabet. And when you get to the top of your scale, you're going to repeat the note you start on. So that's the first thing you need to know. In any major scale, you're always going to have one note representing every letter of the alphabet. The most easy scale to start off with is the C major scale. And this scale is easy to start with because it doesn't have any sharps or flats. Now, you'll probably recognize the sound of a major scale when I play it for you. So listen. The thing that makes the sound of a major scale distinctive is the particular pattern of half steps and whole steps that make up the scale. Since scales are made up of half steps and whole steps, the best thing to do would be to start off trying to identify the sound of the half steps and the whole steps. So first I'll play a few for you so that you can hear what they sound like. And then I'll ask you to see if you can test yourself. This right here is a whole step. This is a half step. Here is another half step. And here is a whole step. Here's another whole step. Here's a half step. Which one do you think this is? That is a whole step. And what do you think this is? That one's a half step. A whole step. That one's a whole step too. So listen to the major scale again. Here's the pattern. Starting on the first note, we have a whole, half, whole, half. You probably remember when you learned about the piano keys that I mentioned to you, when you look at any two keys that are next to each other at the top, those are a half step apart. So this key and this key are a half step apart, and this key and this key are also a half step apart. Sometimes people get confused because usually they think of going from a white key to a black key as being a half step, but some of these white keys don't have a black key between them. In that case, these are also a half step apart. So B and C and E and F are half steps. And that's why in C major we don't have any sharps or flats, because we just go from C, whole, half, whole, half. You see how that works? So remember, we're counting steps and not individual notes. So when I wanted to make my C major scale, I started on C, but I didn't call C a whole step. Because just like when you're walking and you put your first foot down, you haven't taken a step yet. C is just like that first step. We have to put our second foot down to make a step. So again, on C, we do whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Other notes will use sharps and flats. From now on, I want you to follow along in your book with the picture of the keyboard that you find at the top of the page, or else if you have a keyboard at home, you can follow along with that, because I'm going to be writing on the staff, but it'll be useful for you to use a keyboard to help you find where the whole steps and half steps are. Now let's try building major scales on the staff. We'll begin with a D major scale. One really good idea when you're writing major scales is to just go ahead and write all the note heads in on the staff where you're going to put the notes. So that way you can make sure that you don't forget a letter or have two of the same letter. So I just wrote a note head on each line and space of the staff from one D up to the next D. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. That would be my first step. Next, since I'm just beginning my scales and I might not be able to always remember what I'm doing as I go along, I might go ahead and write in the pattern underneath these notes. That way, I'll be sure and remember what kind of step I'm supposed to be making between the notes. So now, look at your keyboard. From D to E, I know I need a whole step. Look at your keyboard. Is it, in fact, a whole step from D to E? Yes, it is. I also need a whole step between E and F. Look at your keyboard. Is it a whole step between E and F? Hopefully you said no. Remember, E and F were two of the notes that don't have a black key between them, so they're only a half step apart. How would I make it a whole step, do you think? Well, I need to make the F farther away from the E, right? I can't change the E. I already know I want this E. The F is too close. I need to make it farther from the E, so I'm going to raise it a half step by putting a sharp next to the F. Remember, the sharp goes to the left of the note in the same line or space. Okay, next I need a half step. Look at your keyboard and tell me, is F sharp a half step from G? Yes, it is. So we don't have to change anything there. Is G a whole step from A? Yes. A, is that a whole step from B? Yes. Is B a whole step from C? No. Remember, B and C are the other two white keys on the piano that don't have any black key between them. So, if I want to make this into a whole step, again, I can't change my B. I have to make my C farther away. So what would I do? I'd add a sharp. Finally, I need a half step between C sharp and D. Is that a half step? Yes, it is. All right, so we have a D major scale. Excellent.